And we are back with our first conversation this morning. Joining us on our couch today is the Minister of Home Affairs and New Growth Industry, none other than Honorable Kareem Musa. Good morning.
Good morning, April, and good morning, Paul, and of course, good morning to all the Belizean viewing public out there.
Since it's the first time that you've been sitting on our couch since last year, Happy New Year.
Same to you guys.
How has the year been for you, the first 2 to 3 weeks?
It's been tough, Paul, as one would expect. It's not the kind of news you would want to start off 2023 with. Normally, a new year is for new beginnings, a fresh start, new aspirations and objectives, especially in the profession that I am in. And certainly that news, that harrowing experience that we heard on the New Year's Eve that happened in Belmopan certainly set the tone for the last few weeks, really, especially in our ministry and the police department in terms of the type of work that needs to get done, certainly in solving and making sure we solve this particular case, as all other cases, but this one especially.
Since that's where we're beginning, let me just ask you perhaps for an update on where we are with that investigation in particular.
Well, as you know, the police were very quick in their response. Within 24 hours after the incident, the police had apprehended their prime suspect, and the investigation got off right from the start. I think that anyone who looks at it objectively can see that the police responded swiftly. There was no attempt in any way to try to cover up anything, as you might have heard in the past when it comes to matters involving police or former police officers. So the police definitely sprung into action. The police has been gathering evidence. It continues, the investigation continues. It's not closed at all. And certainly the police feel as though they have their right suspect, and he has been charged for the double murder, which is now a triple murder, and so charges are expected to be levied against Elmerna for the death of now Vivian Ramnaris, which please allow me the opportunity to extend my condolences on behalf of our ministry and the department to the Ramnaris family and to the Belize family. This is a huge loss for Belmopan, which, as you know, Paul, coming from Belmopan, is a peaceful, law-abiding community. And certainly this not just is such a shocking experience, but certainly one of heartbreak. All over again, you could feel the collective heartbreak when we received the news of Vivian's passing. And so this must be a very tough time, not just for the family, but for the entire community of Belmopan. And so the police department definitely owes it to the family to ensure that justice is done in this case.
Speak to us about, I want to dial it back a little bit, just because you talked about the suspect that you have in custody at the moment. Speak to us about the laws surrounding when we charge somebody that's in law enforcement. And I think it's important to note that, you know, this is not the first time this person has come across your table. And then it's not just him. You've had other persons that have been in law enforcement that have walked away from certain charges, right? Based on whatever laws or whatever the case was. So what are the laws that pertain to persons that are in law enforcement and how they are charged afterwards?
Well, depending on the type of crime, the severity of the crime, usually there are parallel proceedings. So there is a disciplinary hearing internally within the police department. There is a tribunal process. But for major offenses like the plane landing, like murder, attempted murder, theft, any of the major crimes, you are charged like any other citizen. So you are subjected to the very same laws. There's no exception to that. There are no sacred cows. You are going to be charged like any other Belizean under our criminal code. So there are no exceptions that are made, but there is a parallel process in terms of a disciplinary tribunal that also takes place.
How confident, and I'm sure that as the minister, you get to see the files that the public don't get to see. You get to hear the briefings about the evidence that has been gathered that the public don't get to get access to, simply because these are information that, of course, would ventilate themselves within the court case. How confident are we that in fact we have the right suspect in this matter, and are there any suspicions that the accused may not have been working alone in this
There are suspicions, starting with your latter question first, and so we are looking at other possible individuals that are closely linked to Elmer Na. But to answer your question, in cases like this, I am always cautiously optimistic. Yes, we are confident, but at the same time, we cannot rest, Paul. While you may have what you think is a smoking gun to certainly put away someone like Elmer Na for the rest of their lives, you cannot just rely on that piece of evidence. You have to look at not just camera evidence, you have to look at phone evidence, certain things that you all have to gather in an investigation like this. And so it is certainly not a closed case. Like I mentioned, the work continues in piecing together this puzzle. But in terms of on the surface, the evidence that was gathered within the first 48 hours, it certainly was pointing in that direction, which, like I said, led to the very quick response by police in apprehending Elmer Na.
Speaking about camera evidence, there's a hot button topic right now where the former Assistant Commissioner of Police is being brought at the fore where this discussion is concerned. There's concerns that there may be an attempt to pervert the course of justice. Are we looking at investigating former ACP Marco Vidal?
Yes, 2 days ago, as you know, a video footage from a particular premises was circulated on social media. And let me say that many times when things like this happens, it compromises surveillance that might have been taking place at a particular time. But at the same time, in this day and age, the public feels that they need to have transparency in the process. And so at the same time, that's a good thing. But what I can say is that when the police received that footage, certain actions were taken by police officers within a matter of hours. The vehicle that was in that video was pulled over. There were 2 occupants in that motor vehicle. They were detained, I believe, for 48 hours. I would have to clarify the amount of time. Those individuals were questioned, but ACP Vidal at that time, again, this was within hours after that purported incident, was not in the vehicle at that time. And so the police set out, because in the video it appears to be ACP Vidal, the police then set out to bring in former ACP Vidal for questioning. I know that they visited 2 locations, his house and another location, and he could not be found at those places. But what I have been informed by the police, by HNCIB, is that yesterday at approximately 9 a.m., before the police went to search for him again, his attorney called HNCIB to say that they would be bringing him in for questioning today. So this morning it is expected that former ACP Vidal will be brought in by his attorney for questioning.
We have a situation whereby it took place in a community that has a growing population, but it's not just a growing population of just Belizeans. You also have a large immigrant population, right? And this is in reference to Belmopan in Belmopan. When there are witnesses in these kinds of situations, most of the times people don't want to come forward because they're scared. How is is your government, your department, addressing witness protection, and particularly those that are from immigrant that have a particular status, they feel already not trustworthy of the government? How are we focusing on witness protection?
Yeah, that's certainly a culture that we would want to change, April. I know that in particular in Belize City, where we do have like gang rivalries being the most common form of threat and criminal activity, in a lot of those cases, people do not want to participate in the
Right.
process and cooperate. What we do find out district is that there is greater participation by witnesses. And so in this particular case, we are encouraging, if it is that this individual has information to provide to police, for them to come in and provide that information, because it is only through that process that in fact charges can be levied against anyone that is in any way trying to intimidate or thwart the course of justice. And so that is absolutely essential. I cannot emphasize that enough. But in terms of the strides that we've made over the last few years, we do have a Protection of Witnesses Act that was passed, which provides for anonymity of witnesses. We have also engaged other countries like Trinidad in the Caribbean that want to do an exchange program for witnesses. And so we are looking at various options to put in place to ensure that the identity of these witnesses, and so that they feel safe, of course, but their identity is protected.
The thing is, Belize is so small, right? And certain incidents happen where, I don't know surveillance and how your team goes about doing their investigations, but I would like to believe that persons don't come forward because they feel that they're already targeted. They've already been watched. They already know. And so because we live in that small community, what are the chances of them being fully protected the minute they walk into your station?
Yeah, and in cases like that, additionally, we could provide police security for particular witnesses, especially those that feel that their lives are at stake, that they feel threatened. We can provide police security for them as well. And so, you know, those are things that we will have to change. Like I said, we have greater participation and cooperation of witnesses when it comes to murders and other criminal activities happening outside of Belize City, and we want to absolutely reinstate that confidence in Belize City as well when it comes to cases that individuals feel that they can trust the police officers.
When you, and I want to walk back a bit to the surveillance footage we're showing from Belmopan, because I want to know what goes through your mind when you see surveillance footage like that, where allegedly the former Assistant Commissioner of Police visits an establishment, and we can't confirm exactly what he went there to do, but there are suspicions and speculations about why he visited that location, which, if you know Belmopan, is only a block or two away from where the Ramnare's family lived. When you see somebody like this it's the person we suspect to be in that video, whose name has been called in a number of issues, and as a matter of fact, his retirement came at the heels of a controversy surrounding a drug playing situation, and more so we see where the accused murderer, Elmer Na, name has been linked to his name on a number of occasions. So when you see this, I mean, you can't blame people for being cynical about, or very suspicious about a situation like this. What's the thoughts that come to your mind?
Very, very disturbed, Paul, as with the rest of the country. Very disturbing and concerned when we see situations like this, which have developed over many years. And I think that is the sort of deep dive conversation that needs to be had, because a lot of the time the opposition would say that, oh, why is the minister blaming the past? And it's not about blaming, it's to ensure that we do not make the same mistakes that we have in the past. I could recall in 2010 when the GSU was introduced to Belize. I remember the footage clearly, barging into people's homes with masks on, with big machine guns, a paramilitary force just totally terrorizing the residents, particularly of Belize City. And that is one of our mandates, was to get rid of these rogue elements, these rogue units within the police department. And so you have, for example, the GSU, which Elmer Na ACP Vidal, Michelle Brown. These are all people who were parts of these units which were formed under the last administration and allowed to operate with impunity across Belize. When it was that ACP Vidal left the GSU, another unit was formed called the COS team, the Strike Action Team or something like that, the SAT. Again, another rogue unit that was enabled by the last administration. And so when we came into office in 2020, it's a moving train, really, Paul. It's not as though with the new 26 politicians that are now in government, you get a new police department. No, you are given this police department to work with. And so one of our first things to do was to disband the GSU. And so that has completely changed to now the GI3, which is based on intelligence gathering, smart policing, investigation and interdiction, because we do need a department or a unit that is focused on the gang elements. But there's no longer that suppression and that oppression that came with the GSU. We disbanded this COS unit again, which was implicated. Several members of this COS unit implicated in this drug plane landing. Immediately that was disbanded. And so we are rooting out the cancer. We got rid of Elmer Nah in a certain extent because there is a process. He was placed on interdiction. He was not an active member when he did this. And we retired ACP Vidal. So these are certain actions that I think you have to look at over the last 15 years, that we should not be making that type of mistake again, whereby politicians, it's not just that they allow it to happen, they enable these units to operate with impunity. And that is a very dark discussion, but it's one that is necessary to have.
Would you then agree that to some degree we perhaps train or enable these officers to in the direction of becoming rogue cops, in the sense that the type of training they receive is one that gives them the sense of power, that sense of power to sort of go about doing things as they so choose? Because when a police officer enters the force, I'm sure there's criminal records that are checked, backgrounds, information that has to be submitted. So for a lack of better words, you have innocent police officers per se, or folks with a clean record coming in. But as time progresses, through training, through this paramilitary training, to understanding how to use a gun, understanding different techniques and tactics, they then feel empowered and entitled in a manner. And then when you add the impunity that some of them operate with, you get these types of rogue cops. So is that the case? Is the department training rogue cops?
I would not say that, Paul. I would say that when it comes to the GSU and the COS team, and I will put those two separately because we have identified that cancer and we are dealing with that cancer. We disbanded both of those units. But when you look at the type of training, I know several officers, excellent officers, who received the same type of training that someone like Elmer Nah received, but it is how you utilize your training. It is how you as a person, whether it is that you're a good person or a bad person, it comes down to basically that. But to touch on your last point, and I think that is the important point, which I'm saying is the big mistake that the last administration made, is that it gave them its blessing. That is the difference. So it's not just about training, but it gave them, these units, their blessing to operate with impunity. I'm sure you've heard it before. Who does the GSU report to? Only the Prime Minister. The GSU, you know, doesn't report to its own minister. It reports to the Prime Minister or even to the United States, and that it can operate with that level of impunity. And so those are very concerning things whenever you enable officers to feel that they are more powerful than the average officer. They are more powerful than the citizens out there that they have sworn to protect and serve. That is a type of power that was ingrained in these individuals, and now we see them acting out because they no longer have that power, but they feel that they can go into your establishment and request your footage. They feel that they can go out there and kill without any consequences. And so that is the type of thing that we are rooting out, like I said, in the department.
So I thought you were going to go somewhere else with that question, but I think just to piggyback on what Paul mentioned, I wasn't going to ask if you were training rogue cops per se, but I was going to ask if there is any movement to perhaps change the program and how officers are trained at the infancy stage. I know that they go through 6 months of training and so forth, education and now being established within the department, which is great. But psych exams, vetting processes, all of that, are there movements for those types of programs within the department before they even step out into the field?
Absolutely, April, and that's something that I think the media should cover, the curriculum that is now offered. I think, Paul, I know Channel 5 did a story on our human rights
Yes.
Aspect of the curriculum that we have actually put in place. While it was that there were courses before, there are actually now books that they have to study from when it comes to human rights, in terms of how to deal with mental patients, that is in there, in terms of how not to use excessive force, something as basic as that. That is now a part of our curriculum. And so those are things that are important for the media to cover in terms of the shift that has taken place under our administration. It's a paradigm shift really from this paramilitary oppressive force to a more community smart policing that is based on intelligence as opposed to oppression. That is the shift. Again, it's a moving train that we came on, but those are the things that we have put in place to ensure that we do not have the same types of officers like Elmer not coming out of the department.
How is the police being trained differently or separately from perhaps like the BDF? I understand that, you know, you have to go through vigorous training and so forth, but we talk about this militia kind of culture that we have within our domestic authorities. So what is the difference in how polices are trained?
Well, the clear difference, like I mentioned, in 2010, we were training officers to be oppressive and suppressive.
Yes.
That is no longer there. So we do not have that type of training. Yes, you have officers who are trained in defense. You have officers who are trained how to use a pistol because they have to. They are police officers. But at the same time, it is more defensive training as opposed to going after people and being oppressive and suppressive. So that is really, if you were to put it in a nutshell, there's not that type of training that existed for the GSU in 2010 existing right now in the police department.
Okay, so I wanted to, for a bit, switch to some solutions or some approaches we're taking to deal with these issues, particularly where crime is concerned, as we step into 2023. And I know that you recently wrapped up a retreat with cabinet. Some in the opposition says you guys are on a vacation, and an all expense paid vacation, courtesy the public. Tax dollars, right? And that's perhaps a conversation for another day, because I know this controversy was raised last year as well. But one of the issues that we may still be going into 2023 with is police brutality. Something that I know we've heard in 2022 has decreased significantly. Would you speak to what solutions or approaches we're taking to decrease these incidents of police brutality, particularly on some of the most vulnerable within our society, within some of the poorest communities? We're talking about Southside Belize City in particular, where a lot of the complaints of police brutality come out of.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Paul. And starting off with the first part of your question about it being a retreat, I think we need to change the name from a retreat, really, because
conference. I thought it was conference.
Yeah, because that is actually a lot of hard work that goes into the night. For instance, just yesterday, myself, the commissioner, Deputy Commissioner Rosado, and Mr. Dawson had an opportunity to present our crime strategy for 2023 to 2025. And that took 3 hours. That was a 3-hour presentation. And so I want to thank the Prime Minister and Cabinet for affording us that opportunity, because coming into 2023, citizen security is on everybody's mind. Yes, it is that we had only 113 murders. I think it's 25 per capita, which is excellent compared to the last 13 years. But as I always say, I don't like to compare myself to a failing era. We need to do a lot better than that, because 113 is 113 too many. And so we have to continue with this fight. We have to continue with this effort. And so we did roll out our plan to Cabinet. It of course includes the multi-sectoral approach, which I have to applaud the efforts of Mr. Dawson and his team over at the Leadership Intervention Unit. Because as I always say, crime fighting is not just about policing and policing effort. It is about all stakeholders coming together to say, this is the plan, this is the roadmap that we want to move forward with when it comes to crime fighting. And it is actually an 84-page document. We will be launching it very shortly in the weeks to come. And really, it is an all-of-government approach to fighting crime. It is saying, you, Minister of Infrastructure, how is it that you can come into the picture to assist with crime fighting? You, Minister of Agriculture, your Department of Youth Services, the Ministry of Health, helping us to fight with the mental illness challenges and mental patients that we have on the streets of Belize. So each and every department and ministry has a role to play. And so that really was the substance of our presentation at Cabinet yesterday. And of course, other crime fighting strategies, dealing with rogue cops, which we have a very good track record over the last 2 years of dealing with them, dismissing them when they manifest themselves right away. So it really is an extraction. It's like extracting the cancer from the department. And that is not to say we don't still have others that we need to deal with. And so that is an ongoing process. We do have the introduction of body cams that are now worn at checkpoints and worn by these specialized units, the SPU and the GI3, so as to give citizens that added comfort that, you know what, they have a recording as well. I can record, and I want to encourage all Belizeans to record situations where they feel that they are being abused or oppressed in any way, to record as well, because that is now the new shift. The new era that we're living in, and we cannot continue to condone police brutality in any form. And so we have made great strides, but certainly that is a continuing, ongoing process.
But let's be real, Minister. You guys, the head, you're not everywhere that your officers are. You can't be monitoring them 100% of the time. And we talk about body cams in an ideal world where we could perhaps review all these hours and hours and hours of footage. But we don't live in an ideal world. And these officers will do as they please when the eyes of their commanders, or the eyes of the minister, or the eyes of the commissioner is not on them. And that's a reality where the citizens have to face, that the vulnerable has to face. How do we get to a place where we take these complaints more seriously? Because a lot of times these young men will say, well, I'm not going to make no report because they're not like they want to do anything about it. Or they will say, you know what? They're not even going to take me serious at the front desk, right? I know, like, just like how we now have a stronger emphasis on domestic violence and those reports, where we actually have units. It's a police brutality complaints unit, maybe? I don't know.
No, well, there is. It is called Professional Standards Branch, and that is exactly what I was referring to earlier, Paul. It is not as though a complaint is made to me, the minister, and we then dismiss 150 rogue officers or 150 officers who were seen on our video footage abusing anyone. That's not how it works. It goes to the professional standards branch. There is a tribunal process, and thereafter the individual is sanctioned, usually with a dismissal. Under our administration, that is the way that we're going, because we do not tolerate abuse and oppression under this administration. I cannot answer questions for the past that have led us to where we are today. I can only move forward from here and to deal with the situation as I know best as minister and as the Compol knows best as the Commissioner of Police. And so I am not the person to come and make a complaint to. You're perfectly right. There is the professional standards branch, and I can tell you that there is a high success rate of getting rid of officers under our administration who manifest themselves, whose bad behavior manifests itself, and we deal with it.
Well, coming right back to Paul's initial question, right? Where does the idea stem from? Where this brutal force is the only way that I am going to be able to get results. And I know you talked about, eliminating certain units and so forth, but it's not just these units that were doing it, right? And I wonder, why is it that the police feel that this is the way they're going to have to make an arrest, even if somebody is, resisting to be arrested. That goes right back to my question about how are they being vetted, what is their training like, what kind of consequences come for these officers, because the public, we don't see these tribunals. We only see, okay, the case come back 5 years later, and now the person is being arrested and charged and placed in prison. And so where do these lines cross? What happens in a police department and feel like I have to shake up Paul to make sure I could carry on that station? Why are these cultures being manifested in the department? Yeah,
that's a very good question, April. And again, it requires us looking into the past in terms of, again, it's a moving train. We had 2,000 officers that we came in and met. And so you have to look at the type of qualifications, requirements back then to become a police officer and where we have taken it today. And so we have improved the standards within the police department. Before, it's another dark secret, but it used to be based on politics. People used to get into the police department because they know the minister or a minister, and that's how they would get in, with just a primary school diploma. And so we have improved that situation. You must have a high school degree now in order to qualify. There is now a vetting process, a rigorous vetting process, where many people did not make the cut. Out of the 1,600 officers or individuals, who applied to become officers, only 150 of them actually made it to go to training school. So those are the individuals, so to speak, that made it through all the requirements, did not have any kind of background affiliation with gangs. That type of vetting took place with gangs or anything like that. Their blood samples were taken to forensics to test to see if they had any drugs in their system or alcohol and that sort of thing. So this is the type of rigorous process that now takes place when you want to become a police officer. And so again, dealing with the past that we still have with us today, it is a matter of utilizing the different processes that we have at Professional Standards Branch in getting rid of these officers. And you're perfectly right. It is not just these specialized units that were allowed to operate with impunity under the last administration. It could be your normal police officer on the street in normal khaki and blue. With your uniform, it doesn't come with just power, because a lot of them look at that and say, oh, I have all of this power because I'm in this uniform. It comes with responsibility. That is something that officers oftentimes forget. You have a responsibility. You are a normal citizen like each and every Belizean out there, and you are trained and you have sworn to protect our Belizean citizens. That is your job, not to abuse your authority because you are in that uniform. And so you're perfectly right. But again, there are different processes that we have been employing over the last 2 years to curb that culture that has existed, not just under the last administration, but for decades. It's been a decades-long thing of building up to where we are today.
Are you satisfied with the performance of your Commissioner of Police?
You know, it's a tough task, and I like to say that it does require political will, because while it is that he may have good intentions, he answers to bosses above him. And so if those bosses do not have the political will to get rid of rogue officers, or if they are tolerating rogue officers, then you will never get those types of results. So it does require a hand-in-hand approach between the minister and the commissioner and the CEO to all be on the same page to make sure that we have these objectives that we want to accomplish. And so I think that, you know, oftentimes he has a very difficult task, because if you know the commissioner, he's very hands-on. Some would say he likes to micromanage, but in situations like this, you kind of have to micromanage each situation so that it does not get out of control. And so I think in the circumstances, he has been doing a great job.
I want to dial back to how your officers and other persons that are, you know, in certain cases and how they're convicted. Some folks are calling for the return of capital punishment, in particularly the situation with Mr. Na. So let's talk about how your convictions work. What would Mr. Na have to be, or just hypothetically, what would he have to be charged with for a life sentence?
Yes, so the death penalty still exists on our law books in Belize.
Yeah, it does.
No one might realize that, but yes, it is still there. And it is still the option of the office of the DPP or the prosecution. In this case, it will be a special prosecutor to request the death penalty in a situation like this. And in any situation of a heinous murder, you have that right to request a death penalty. It does not mean that it will be acceded to, because we have seen a trend over the last decade where not only are we seeing life sentences only, not the death penalty, you're seeing life sentences, and you're seeing with possibility of parole within 30 or 40 years. And that has been a trend all across the Caribbean, where now it is that you're seeing lesser sentence. So while it is that we as a population may want to see not just a life sentence, but in a case like this, the death penalty, we have to look at the trends in terms of the jurisprudence and the judiciary, because at the end of the day, it is the judge that will decide how many years you spend, or whether it is that you get the death penalty, which, like I said, still sits on our books.
Have we sought to identify a special prosecutor as yet?
We have been looking at one attorney from Jamaica, as well as 2 local attorneys. I don't want to disclose the names as yet until those individuals have agreed to serve. And it's also a process in which, while I do not have to do it, or the police department does not have to do it, we have engaged in a discussion with the family as well, because I think it is extremely important for them to be satisfied, because it is their loved ones that have been lost. And so I would want to get their blessing as well in terms of the selection of that particular special prosecutor. So we have shared the name of the international attorney that we have looked at. And again, that is something that I would want to get in place very soon, because it's very important for us to have a prosecutor's eye on the file as well, to make sure that we are gathering as much of the evidence needed to get a conviction as possible.
What do you say to Belizeans so that they feel secure that something like this should not occur again?
It should never have occurred in the first place. Like I said, I really cannot answer. I wish I could answer for the decisions we made in the past, in the individuals that we enabled and gave that type of power to have them feel like they can be these monsters in our society. I can just assure Belizeans that we are putting structures in place for it to never happen again, for us to not go down this road of, in any kind of way, facilitating that type of behavior within the police department. We have to do this culture shift. This is not a matter of if, this is a matter of we must do this culture shift within the department. And so what I can tell Belizeans, yes, it may be a very hard pill to swallow, but we are not going to tolerate. We do have this zero tolerance approach when it comes to oppression and abuse and rogue police officers. And I think the viewing public recognizes that distinction, this shift that has taken place, but it will take some time for us to completely cleanse and purge ourselves of these rogue officers within the department.
Minister, as we close, because we're running out of time and we should just have you for the entire show, there's a couple of questions from our viewers that I'd just like for you to address. And I think you kind of addressed this, but from a regulatory standpoint, one viewer is asking if regulations should be updated for police officers to be dismissed based on a no tolerance policy. And then another viewer, and you could take the questions as you choose, is asking, will there be any study conducted like Dr. Gale's report on root behaviors?
Yes, and starting with your second question, I think a lot of the approach that we have with the multi-sectoral approach deals with exactly that, going at crime and tackling it at the very root of it, from womb to adulthood. I think that is the approach that the multi-sectoral approach is taking. And it definitely follows a lot of the teachings and principles laid out by Dr. Gale. Mr. Dawson is a huge fan of Dr. Gale, and so a lot of the work that we've put in over the last year does incorporate some of the teachings of Dr. Gale, so to speak. In terms of the disciplinary tribunal system that we have in place for police officers, while we have been employing that, there is also the possibility that we do a change in the law that would give the commissioner of police, not any minister of government, but that would give the commissioner of police to summarily dismiss, even without a tribunal process. That could be a slippery slope, but I'll tell you this, that's a part of the discussion we had at Cabinet yesterday. Whether it is that we should just give a commissioner of police, not just this commissioner, but any future commissioner, that type of authority to dismiss summarily without a tribunal process. It goes against the principles of natural justice and an individual's right to a hearing, but at the same time, we do see where drastic action may need to be taken in situations like this.
You know, as my final question, just to ask about your other portfolio, just a quick question, because somebody also asked me to ask, have we solidified now and agreed that your ministry will get Ministry of New Growth Industries will get a budget and a bigger team?
Thanks for advocating on my behalf there, Paul. It's definitely something that I think Cabinet has to consider. We do have to bear in mind the challenges that we've had over the last few years with COVID, with, of course, rising inflation by the day and budgetary constraints. Certainly, the Ministry of New Growth Industries was really created as a conceptual ministry in order to facilitate private sector investments, and in particular in the cannabis industry, which we see as a multi-billion-dollar industry all across the world. And so I do feel that we may have missed that opportunity, but at the same time, there are other things that as Minister of New Growth Industries we can encourage. For example, there's the NIME initiatives with the female entrepreneurs that we are supporting, of course, through the DFC and through Beltrade. Those are organizations that already exist that our Ministry of New Growth works with in order to facilitate this type of investment and development of our businesses and entrepreneurs across Belize. And I think that really is the success story of a ministry like this, is that we are tapping into those individuals, those MSMEs. There's a huge focus of that on that in the upcoming budget. So not necessarily an injection of funds into our ministry, but rather into businesses that we can see that can help the normal Belizean to get off the ground, these mom and pop businesses to get off the ground. Because at the end of the day, when you look at Belize as a country, small businesses really are what generate business all across Belize. You could just look at Coney Drive drive and see the myriad of restaurants, of small shops, and these are all things that I think goes a long way to show our industriousness as a people, and certainly that is what we want to tap into from our ministry.
All right. Well, Minister, thank you so much for joining us this morning to have this very important conversation. I think a lot was discussed, and we need to bring you on again,
Certainly.
you know, to continue having this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very
And
much.
with that, we are going to take a quick break, and we'll be kind of segueing into the forensics and DNA portion of crime in Belize. Stay tuned.